You are all most welcome, both those who are attending here today and those who are joining us online. We are delighted to announce that we have approximately 150 delegates here this morning and even more members online. My name is Andrew Nugent and I'm Chairman of the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland. I'm Chairman of the Quantity Surveyors Division of the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland, and we are hosting this seminar this morning with CITA and along with our event partners. Our event partners today are the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, the Construction Industry Federation, the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, the Institution of Structural Engineers, the Law Society of Ireland, the Association of Consulting Engineers in Ireland, the Dublin Institute of Technology, the Office of Public Works, and last but not least, Engineers Ireland. I have the honour to act as your chairman for this inaugural CITA Building Information Modelling Lecture. I must also congratulate CITA, who have organised this series and who have uniquely facilitated a spirit of cooperation between our event partners in both the design and creation of this 10-event lecture programme for 2012. This series will allow us as members of these organisations to establish for ourselves the benefits of implementing BIM in a manner that will ensure that we gain productivity advantages and, most importantly, compete more successfully both on a national and international stage. The lecture this morning is the first of a structured series over the next 10 months, which I am confident will shape the contents of a future policy for Ireland in the implementation of this integrated technology. And having all of the significant stakeholders involved and participating in that policy will undoubtedly help in its rapid ongoing design and implementation. Indeed, our venue here this morning in the Royal College of Physicians is most appropriate. Our medical colleagues and their ancillary industry are, I feel, leaders in research and development and innovation, which is an aspect of our industry and profession which I feel has progressed slowly and performed poorly in the past. But BIM is a good news story, which we badly need. And I feel that BIM will provide us with the platform as a profession and as an industry to better sell our services to an ever increasingly more disparaging client base who seek more for less. Many of you will be aware of the increasing debate surrounding BIM in recent years. It is now more than just a debate. The talking is over, and now across Europe they are getting down to working with a clear implementation programme. No one more so than our neighbours in the UK, where the UK government have delivered on a policy to increase BIM uptake over the next 4 years, to improve the government estate in terms of cost, time and carbon performance. Similar initiatives are evident in the UK, Scandinavia and across Europe. We must not be left behind. In that vein, I am delighted to welcome David Philp, our guest speaker this morning. David graduated in the early 90s and straight from college joined Balfour Beatty as a graduate engineer. He advanced through the company, becoming Director of Technical Services and latterly BIM Programme Director. David's enthusiasm lies in highlighting the new potential of technologies and how we can interact with them and unlock new ways of working throughout the entire life cycle. As you will learn from David this morning, David is very passionate about the industry and perceives BIM as being a catalyst for much needed reform. As an early adopter of practical change and purposeful collaboration, David is currently seconded to the Cabinet Office's Efficiency and Reform Group, where he is head of BIM implementation. Quickly moving on, the format this morning will be that David will talk for approximately 35 to 40 minutes. This will be followed by a quick question and answer, approximately 10 minutes, and then we'll break into workshop scenario where we'll have a round table discussions, effectively addressing a couple of key issues and questions, which we'll put up on the board. I will then ask a representative from, or spokesperson from each table to address the floor for a couple of minutes. Finally, at 9:40, we'll have a wrap-up question and answer, and we hope to close off the seminar at 10 o'clock, following which there'll be some networking, and I would encourage you to meet and liaise with our sponsors this morning. Just with that now, I'd like to pass you over to David.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay at the back? Good stuff. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind invite to attend today. And obviously this is the first of the CITA BIM workshop and series, one of 10. And we think it's a real fantastic opportunity, for CITA to try as an independent body and bring everybody together, to continue this discussion on BIM. And for me, today is very much about starting to frame the question of what BIM looks like. Andrew used the term lecture. Well, I generally hope it's not a lecture. I mean, what's today about? For me, really, it's an opportunity to share our journey so far. And I think it's fair to say that, like most, we have just started on our journey. And I think one of the things I like to say, when I mentioned to people in the UK I was coming to CITA, the first thing was CITA was recognised, and everybody saw it being as very much, the leading edge. So I think there's a real good opportunity, I think especially in Ireland, to, accelerate your journey. I think it's often fair to say the UK can be a bit like a super tanker. It takes time to turn it around, but I think Ireland's a bit, leaner, agile, can turn around and tact a bit faster in the challenging times ahead. But first off, I'd like to start off with an apology. I went to Google this morning and typed BIM Ireland, and there may be some folk here that think actually I'm here to talk about cod quotas, so I do apologise about that and to the Board of Fisheries. But as mentioned, what's today about? For me, it's an opportunity to try and start sharing where we are with our plan so far. Perfect. Before we actually talk about BIM, I'd like to tell you, why has BIM been so important to UK government, and why is it so important that we've got over 150 people in this room today? So I think it's quite key that we kind of look at the backstory. What are the drivers for BIM in the UK? And I think the first thing I've got to say is, well, our industry's kind of changed overnight. I think it's fair to say about 7 years ago, you get out your bed in the morning, life was pretty good. We didn't have to innovate, we didn't have to change. We all made our money, and I think in the last few years, the world kind of changed almost overnight for us. The harsh reality is we're back to very much commodity-based selection. It's back to, if you like, lowest capex cost again. And at the other side of that, well, what does that mean to clients? It means we've kind of entered a war economy. Our assets have got to live that a bit longer. We've got to run them much more efficiently. So we've got these two challenges, if you like, that drive industry reform. So in the UK, when we talk about BIM, we're not just talking about technology. We're very much talking about the way we actually do business, about reforming the construction industry. We mentioned cost. Well, cost very much is king, and I hate to say it, is still very much capex focused. And if cost is king, carbon is very much queen. We've got these two horses to ride. We talk about carbon, it's very much in-service carbon. So we're driven, how do we get the cost down? That's kind of our exam question. How do we drive costs down, and how do we do it more efficiently in terms of the carbon agenda, which we think is probably one of the biggest challenges we've got in the UK to make that transition to low carbon. The right-hand side, Paul Morella, Chief Construction Advisor, cheekily says, it's really actually about integration. We live in a fractured industry. We've got all these parties that live very much in their own silos. And for us, the key thing when we say that we're mandated BIM, we're mandated collaborative BIM, it's very much about collaboration right through that entire supply chain. And really that's what we're talking about, starting to bring together the design and construct teams, but also very much the operational teams. I think the industry in terms of procurement routes often talks about early contractor engagement. We think the early FM, the operational team engagement at the very outset, is key to the BIM process as well. As I mentioned, as probably most of you have heard, in fact, hands up, who here has read the government construction strategy in the UK? Excellent. So there's probably about 5%. It is worth a read. Have a look at it, and what you will see, is obviously BIM feature in it, but as I mentioned, it's very much about reform. It's also about trying to codify what we do in terms of construction as well. How do we drive reform? How do we get efficiency? And we have put an actual quantum on it of 20%. We're trying to drive 20% through the supply chain. We talk about the carbon reduction. We're also trying to make sure that we get that integration agenda through it as well. The guy on the right-hand side is Francis Maud, and Francis's accession as a minister is very much in line with our plan for growth. We don't think we're getting value for money in today's economy. We've got to improve how we actually procure our construction services in the UK. And as once you read the report, you'll see that BIM is very much part of that agenda. And that comes back to thinking, are we getting good value for money today? You look at all other industries, you look at your television set in the 1950s, how much that's came down, whereas construction, in terms of output and productivity, has never improved. Well, what does that mean as a client? The UK government's got to become better, well-informed, and be able to have the data to make better decisions. A big part of that as well is we've got to change ourselves. We've got to look in the mirror and say we've got to come up with less adversarial cultures and more collaborative in terms of how we work, and start trying to help drive innovation throughout the supply chain. Now, if you look at that word cloud there for the government construction strategy, you probably won't see the word BIM too much in it. It featured probably in a couple of paragraphs, but you can see there 2.32 that government will require a fully collaborative 3D BIM. And that's basically, we're talking about the asset, we're talking about the data. If you like, we're more interested in terms of the data in the model than we are the actual geometry. And as a minimum by 2016, well, what does that mean? It means actually we're not waiting to 2016. Come June this year, the first notch of the valve is going to get turned open, our first jobs go out. So we ramp up in the maturity between now. We might get, 5% this year, but we'll keep building up till we get to 100% by 2016. So we've got a stage plan that matches our vision, and we're going to measure it. We're going to measure these pilots to make sure that we are getting value, and we will have, if you like, a signposted plan for industry at the end of each year. But if you like, our hypothesis, if you like, is government as a client, which we're one of the biggest clients in the UK, can drive improvement in terms of what we mentioned, our cost, our carbon, our value agenda, by the use of open, shareable information. As I said, it's very much about the data that sits within BIM. So one thing today, as a client, we're more interested in the data than we are the nice, pretty 3D geometry that people often think about in terms of BIM. And our assertion is we've got to be good at buying data as a client. We think we're quite good at buying assets and services, but traditionally, as a constructor, we kind of get all this valuable data that we lose very much at the end of the job, and we never really use it. As you can see, we've got 10 programme tests as well. We said, well, if we do this, we've got to make sure it's valuable. There's no point in doing BIM, if you're not going to get a return on investment from it. It's got to be something that's understandable by all as well in terms of scalability. It's fine the big contractor at £30 million turnover, they'll get it, or they'll hire somebody in to get it, or they'll get a consultant to get it. But this has got to apply to all. It might say the small contract that turns over 100 million. So as it says in your sign, it's very much about the SMEs as it is the big contractors and design teams as well. So it's got to be something that everybody can take away and understand. It's also non-proprietary. Well, what does that mean? It means we're software agnostic. We are not telling industry what software to use. In fact, we're not really interested in the software. We're more interested in the data that comes out the model, and so we'll come on to we're specifying the data set and being able to answer some questions for us. We're not interested in what software supply chain is going to use. It's still got to be competitive. We're still got to let the supply chain come up there with in terms of innovation. We've got to verify as well that we are getting value for this. So that means we've got to measure what we're doing for BIM. Did we actually get success because of the BIM and the reform programme, or is that just simply because the industry itself has got that bit sharper? We are funded. We've got funding for 4 years, and that funding is to try and, if you like, enable these pilot projects from the government department. So we'll come on to it, but we've got 20 work groups up and running at the moment to start giving all our policies, our protocols, our data sets, and to try and kick off these first projects. 2011, well, I think 2010 was maybe much. We had lots of BIM seminars in the UK, well attended, and probably the theme of it, what's this thing called BIM and what kind of things can it do for me? And I think 2011 was a bit of a step change. It was very much about, okay, we're starting to do it, and it's very much about that or the possible. Where do we get the extra value for it? How do we start to really drive the efficiency now, having models? The conversation had kind of changed as well and moved away from, if you like, being the CAD technicians to start going into the main boardroom. How can BIM help me be more efficient as a business? So it starts to become actually an organisational question as well. And I think the good thing for me, there was no more ifs. The UK had kind of moved on to, well, okay, this is real, we've got to do it now. So the rubber was really hitting the road and people were really starting to make it real. And I think that suddenly you take away the question, people innovate, people adapt. It's a bit like our email, you know, people will eventually get it. It's a bit Darwinian, those that don't will just fall away and die to some extent. And we did say, you know, people are starting to follow our signpost journey as well. They are starting, a bit like the digital TV's changeover, people are starting to make the changes in their business that they need. Initially, it's quite small baby steps, but people are starting to change. I think the big thing for us is we started seeing some of the UK publications that BIM was starting to help people win work. And I think that's a big thing. I think everybody in the room wants to now, in today's softening the economy, try and keep being competitive, win work. And BIM can help be more competitive, but it can help sell tender solutions to clients as well. I think the thing at a headline level is we start to see BIM becoming a metaphor, if you like, for transformational change. It wasn't just a bit of new kit, a bit of new technology. This, if you like, was a catalyst for how we change. Well, if we didn't, we kind of realised that industry was in a rather bad place. And if you're like, well, where's BIM in that? Well, we thought BIM was perhaps the big paddle that's going to help us, get through these very much choppy water. So we are kind of driven by the economy as well. We've got to keep improving, be more efficient at what we're doing, and BIM will certainly help that. What we did see early doors, though, was BIM, nobody really looked at it through the client's lens. It was very much through the designer being a bit more efficient or the contractor being a bit more efficient. People knocked on the door saying, we're doing some great clash detection now in our models. We went, so we weren't paying for a coordinated design before. It's like, oh, we didn't say that, we didn't say that. So people struggled initially to say, where is the value proposition for us as a client? So we tried to define what we wanted. And for us, it's the fact that we could actually rehearse an asset. We look, how do we maintain it? How's it going to be built? How do we get more efficient? Facilities management, soft landings. We found it was taking between project completion and being able to operate that asset efficiently over a year, because it took us that long to gather the data set, all the O&M manuals, because it was continually being flung over a series of walls. And BIM, if you like, lets us have that smooth glide path right the way through with the data set. And that data, if you like, lets us, during the whole project life cycle, make very much intelligent decisions as a client. Already mentioned the cost and carbon agenda, but also lets us look at portfolio management as well. I mean, a lot of the government departments have huge portfolios. Simple questions, where are my assets, when do I need to maintain them? It starts to have that forward planning. And that's the big thing as a client. BIM lets you have optimal asset performance. That's the real big part of this. BIM for the client is very much on the right-hand side, the bandwidth, if like is beyond delivery. That's when the real value kicks in for the client. It's also about managing risk as well. I think right through the supply chain, most people, once they start their BIM journey, will see BIM can help you manage your risk profile. And as we mentioned, it's also about better efficiency right for that design and construct process. But ultimately, it comes about better business and social outcomes as well. That's what we really want. We don't want better models, we want better assets at the end of the day and better outcomes from those assets. If it was, I think it's fair to say BIM is very much in fashion in the UK at the moment. It's very much in new black. And the key themes for us, if you like, it's very much about collaboration. And I think today you'll see some good conversation. Start to share your journeys, share your stories, and I think that's why we're here today. You think, we're building the secret sauce, but we want to come and share it, because we know this journey is going to be a lot easier if we try and do it together. We also have to try and create a common language as well and understanding. I think, well, every design's a bit like the snowflake. It all kind of looks a bit different, and BIM helps you tell that story. It certainly helps us be a lot more efficient. And as a client and a design team and a contractor, you can start to validate virtually as well. You don't have to go out in the cold, wet to actually do it. You can do it very much in the office. That makes a huge difference as well. And we want to use our programme to drive innovation as well through the supply chain. And ultimately, I hope it's because we want to try and change this industry. We want to nudge it a bit to the right-hand side and make it that bit better. As I mentioned, though, the real value for us is very much in the data set and what we can start to look at the data. The data starts to answer questions for us. It can help us maintain that asset that bit longer. And what we think, our assertion is maybe 4 or 5 years from now, that people will win data, not because, win tenders because they're actually got the best data set, not because they're the best at laying the bricks or they've got the best supply chain. You build a hospital, you start to look at it and look at your data output from it. Did I get the best energy model? If so, you'll feed it into the start of your BIM process. So what we see is BIM starting to become an iterative loop. The data will flow through it, it'll keep refining, and keep coming back in. So it's very much about who will have the best data in a few years. And what we see in terms of, we mentioned the BIM value proposition, the more that's joined up the conversation in terms of that whole project lifecycle, the bigger it gets. We often try to screw down the design and construct fees, and that's inherently wrong. It's such a small part of the overall picture. If you can use BIM to start to influence business costs, start to make a building more efficient, and it may be something we saw last year, an office where they start to put sensors in seats, linked to a BIM model to say, how big an asset do we need? Look at the occupancy through the BIM model. They started to inform business outcomes, business decisions, and that's where if you can untap that, unlock that in the operational life cycle, you get some fantastic savings. So the more mature the procurement routes, such as PFI and PPP, the bigger, if you like, the BIM value proposition. And the first thing to say, you know, the government construction strategy wasn't just about BIM. I think the first thing you want to say as well, to get really big BIM, and that's where we're talking about asset maintenance and such like, you do need the intelligent client. The client that's going to bring people together, start to bring teams, and start to think this in a whole holistic nature. I think it's fair to say you can get the small BIM, the design and construct value proposition, working on your own, but the bigger BIM needs intelligent clients. So as part of the government construction strategy, that's very much of what we're trying to do, is to, I feel like, go each of the departments and, if you like, educate them in what the good client starts to look like. And I think it's fair to say that people are starting to wake up to it's simply the right thing to do. When you look at other industries, you think, how much has construction industry changed in the last probably 100 years? Well, I think it's fair to say, if you look at that life cycle, you know, we've probably got a bit better in terms of health and safety. We've got a bit better in terms of sustainability. But other than that, in terms of productivity, it's still very much same old, where other industries have embraced the technology, they've started to codify it and become much, much more efficient. And our clients expect that now as well. And I think it's fair to say, well, if we don't do this by 2016, there'll be other nations out there, such as China, that are undoubtedly starting their efficiency programs and will be able to offer this. So it's an imperative, I think, in terms of our ability internationally to move things on. And I think industry at last is starting to realise as well, you know, we don't have to build this one time now and then have to rip it apart and make all these changes. We've now got the opportunity through BIM to virtually coordinate. And I think it's fair to say you're going to be much more efficient doing that in the office than you are in a wet, full-size mock-up. Well, why haven't we done this before? The technologies, everything about BIM's probably been kicking about since at least the 1960s. The chap on the right-hand side, I don't know if anybody knows him, Andrew Wilson-Home, he's the chief executive of the Crossrail job in London, which is probably one of the biggest in Europe at the moment. And Andrew wrote an industry report, and if you haven't read it, it's called Never Waste a Good Crisis, and I must admit, it really is a good read. And Andrew's assertion as well, a bit like Joseph, we've been protected by that quote for many years in terms of, you know, we've had an economic comfort blanket and suddenly it's been whipped off us. We didn't have to innovate, as we said at the beginning. And what it means in the context of today is we've got to change the way we do things. You know, it is a case of let's not waste this good crisis. You know, let's now use it as an opportunity to start innovating. And I think that's why we're starting to see people starting to think about BIM. It's nothing new, but we're now being driven by, you know, the current economic crisis. It's starting to make us do things quite different. So in terms of the backstory, you've got to think, if we're going to make BIM real, it's going to be now. This is the perfect opportunity to make BIM happen. If it doesn't happen but now in 2016, it ain't going to happen. This is the perfect time for industry to change, especially in the UK. I think it's also say that people waste a lot of time trying to think, you know, what is BIM? You know, it's big elephant and people think it is different things. And I think we can all get a bit het up and thinking, oh, is that the right definition? Well, at the end of the day, I think BIM means different things to different people. The reality is they're not all wrong. And you speak to a government department, you know, you come and say to it, we're going to be doing BIM. Oh, great, you know, this is going to change the way we are. We'll be much more efficient and everything. I think in the UK it's seen as the cure to the common cold as well. The reality is, though, it's not a panacea. It needs other things to be bolted onto it. What you see is you give a model out to a team and say, there you are, there's your BIM model. They go, well, why aren't we 20% more efficient? It needs other things alongside it to think about lean ways of working, the intelligent client, the right supply chain around about it as well. It's a piece of the jigsaw. It's not the jigsaw itself. When we decided to describe it, though, we said, well, I hate to say it to the vendors out there, and I'm sure they'll be the first to agree, you can't buy BIM out of a box. You can't phone a vendor and say, can I have some BIM, please? You might get a bit of a product, but as we say, it's only very much part of that journey. And for us, BIM is very much a verb. It's something you do. It's building an information model. And it's certainly not just a building. For us, this is very much applies to, if you like, not just the vertical assets, but linear as well. Our roads program, we're trains, we want to get all into it. It's not just new build, it's refurbishment, and it's the small projects as well. Because a typical project in the UK is quite small. You know, it's the £100,000 car park repairs. Yeah, it's a small warehouse. So we've got to make sure in terms of scalability that what we're doing in terms of BIM goes to all. And I think sometimes it's easier to say what BIM isn't. And the first thing we said, well, BIM is not a technology. That's just a digital tool set, important part of it, but that in itself is not BIM. It's certainly not just 3D, as we mentioned, it's very much about the data within the model, and it's not next generation. I mean, I first came across BIM 2006 over in the US, and to see where they've taken it today in terms of efficiencies is quite incredible. And I must admit, it's something that will keep expanding, it will keep changing. For many in the room today, it will be a bit of a nebulous, trying to understand a concept. But I know in my own journey, it's a bit like the small steps. There's no point in having a big vision, but go back, keep moving your own journey on. We'll come on to that a bit later on. But what we saw in the UK, people were saying, well, we're kind of doing BIM already. And you think, oh, that's good. And what we saw was a lot of this. We call it lonely BIM. The architectural practice that's maybe got a copy of Revit or Bentley or whatever, and they're doing a great job in creating an architectural model, but they're not sharing, they're not getting any value out of it. What we're trying to do by 2016, if you like, is try and get collaborative BIM, start to bring the people together, especially the design teams, to start sharing the information to get better outcomes from it. Where we want to be, if you like, and we call this real BIM, is integration, where we can start, and the clients, maybe the conductor, bringing the teams together. It's a bigger orchestra. You've got your FM team there, the whole supply chain is in the arena. And where BIM, well, BIM, we think, is actually the musical score. It's a common data set right the way through it that everybody can start to understand. And what we hear a lot of is, well, we're doing level 3 BIM. Well, what we see in the UK is very few people are actually doing level 2 BIM, if you like, collaborative BIM in the first instance. So, we've got a way to go yet. And I think industry is not yet ready for full integration. But I think it's very much a very, very simple assertion in terms of what BIM is. I think you bring people together around a campfire, the right people, and a bit like today, you start having a discussion, you start to get some value creating collaboration. You think, well, where's BIM in it? I think this is starting to become the typical project in the UK now, where you've got the BIM model, and on a weekly basis you bring your team around about it, your designers, your main supply chain, and you start to make well-informed decisions using the data, using the visualization. You build it maybe 3-4 times virtually, and hopefully it runs flawlessly out on site. And you think, well, this for me is the real reason to do BIM. If you're a contractor, a designer, what do you do? Do you go after that 1%, 2% profit maybe? Or do you try and untap that 30% waste that we know that's inherent within our process in terms of what we do? Not waste in terms of rubbish on site, but in terms of that pure process waste. And the assertion is, with BIM, you can build better before you build it. Build it virtually, as we say that, how many times? I think Langer Rook and the Leadenhall said they'll build it 37 times virtually, and then they'll get it right once in terms of great efficiency out in site. And that's what BIM offers, if you like, being able to take the waste out of the process. And we had the question, well, if BIM was a cake, what would that recipe start to look like? Said, well, the key ingredients for us, starting down the right, is the objects. The product manufacturers will start to play a key process in this as well, starting to build the objects that you start to put into models. So as your conversation continues, you'll start to find that the community will grow. You'll have to get your product manufacturers in here to start building these objects. And I think maybe your next series is actually on library management. It's very much key to the BIM journey. We mentioned the technologies, that if you like, these data-rich toolkits, the tool set around about BIM. And for us, that's really good, but you'll see there we've got a term COBE, the Construction Operation Building Information Exchange. And if like that is a data set that we want out of our technology, that is what we are asking for from BIM. We want a structured data set that's the same on every project. And then to the left of that, you start to see process. And process for us, as we find, is key to this. You need to have the right lean process that flows right the way through the entire project life cycle. You put those three objects together, and that's probably about 40% of what makes up BIM. The big part in terms of collaboration, if you like, is a behavioural change. Trying to make people change that heuristic bias that's inherent with our organisation. Trying to retrain people to actually think, how do we start to drive value through what we do? So here, if you like, our imperatives for us, and the icing on the cake for us, you put them all together, you start to get these optimally performing assets, and you start to get some better outcomes. Now, if it was a cake, we think it is a bit like the old Christmas cake. The earlier you start it, the better it tastes. Now, there's a case we often hear now of architects saying, yeah, we're going to do some BIM, but we'll not do it until we reach stage D. This has got to be something that you start thinking about very much at the beginning of the process. So, okay, that's what I said, this is what BIM looks like, but we've asked for this thing called level 2 BIM. So what's level 2 BIM? Well, you can see, like any good diagram, it also happens to be a triangle. And if you like, when we talk about level 2 BIM, it's moving away beyond the paper, the ordinary CAD. It's moving beyond file-based collaboration to, if you like, the file-based collaboration, but library management as well. We'll have protocols to actually start managing the data structure in place as well. And we'll keep moving on, say maybe 4 or 5 years from now, we'll start to think about level 3, if like that web service with the BIM hub, but we know we're far bit away from it. So if you like, we've got to now in 2016 to implement level 2 BIM. And what is level 2 BIM? Everybody starts to scratch their head a bit in the UK, and we're saying, oh, actually, it's a series of domain models that come together. We're not asking for a single model. We're asking for, it might be the architect's model, the FM model, the structure. So we're asking for a series of models that we bring together for a purpose, if you like. It may be coordination, it may be look at the construction simulation. But if you like, that's what we're asking for meantime in the UK, is a series of models, not the single model. But what we do, though, is having one BIM input means we can get a lot of outputs from it. And we said this is very much a change programme for us, and it's something we are spending a lot of time, probably one of the reasons we're here, we are trying to signpost the journey with industry, trying to get them ready, especially SMEs, to start to step up. And I think the great opportunity you've got over here is, you've got another 9 of these, you can start to expand your knowledge, start to change the industry. And I think it's a bit like, I've done my kids, you kind of, we're trying to get the stabilisers off, we're trying to get industry ready, we've got 4 years to try and give them guidance, raise awareness. And I think it would be fair to say that most of you in the room will have to do the same with your own supply chain, get them ready, get their stabilisers off as well. Have we got it right? Well, we think the industry in the UK is very much ready. We're kind of doing level 1 all right, it's a bit kids play. To the right, we reckon level 3 BIM, full integration, information living in the cloud. Well, the problems with Twitter. You ask Jeremy Clarkson, I'm sure he'll tell you it's probably not a good idea at this moment in time. Lots of legal aspects around that we just haven't simply solved. So we think level 2 BIM, collaboration in itself, is hard enough, and it gives us real, if you like, value from what we're doing. So we think it's very much sits just right. So what does our BIM programme look like? Well, you can't see it there, but if you like, we've got 20 work packages as part of our funding. We've got 20 work package managers coming together and creating a piece of work, a structured data set, our plans of work. We're looking at the legal aspects, project insurances, round about level 2. We're not trying to solve the level 3 problems, we're trying to solve this very much within the context of level 2 collaboration. So for us, giving it some definition in the UK has been important. Otherwise, if you like, everybody would be doing BIM. We didn't need government to do this, but everybody who went off doing their own thing have ended up like a bowl of spaghetti, if you like. So if you like, we're trying to give some steer to industry. So, we're trying to take the waste out of the entire process. Big part of this as well is lean and collaborative delivery. As we mentioned, having the model itself doesn't make you more efficient. It needs you to drive that lean paradigm, run about it with others. So if you like, we've got 20 work packages. So if you like, we've given, if you like, the pool, the government saying this is what you've got to be doing if you work with a government department. But if you like, the push, this is something we can't just dump on industry and go do. So we're trying to listen, if you like. We've created, if you like, 7 groups. First thing, the top, we've got a group in the UK called CITA. We've got all the technology alliance players, many of in the hall today, that are in, we're hearing what they've got, what products they've got to try and support our journey as well, and going to support supply chain, hearing their concerns, and how do we help SMEs be able to adopt it. We mentioned institutions. We've got lots of different institutions as well. It's critical we get them on side and start to look at the plans of work as well. It's one of the things we're doing at the moment. We're not saying we're going to have a BIM plan of work, but at least let's have a BIM overlay. Let's try and get the data drops to try and line up. And I must admit, I think in the UK we're having a real good conversation with all the institutes, which is really, really positive. In fact, if somebody said if we achieve one thing, I think getting institutional alignment within itself would be a fantastic goal. The delivery supply chain, we're working with all the main contractors, the SMEs, the product manufacturers, and the United Kingdom Contractor Group. We go with them, we give them early sight of their work, and any concerns that they've got. Operationally, we're working with all the FM contractors and such like that. Again, understand how do we start to get that soft landing? How do we take the data right the way through? Training and education, I'll come on to that in a moment, is a massive task, and we're trying to get together with all the educational establishments in the UK, all the training vocational people, to understand what do we now have to do to get industry ready in terms of people that are coming out. Meeting liaison is a big thing. I mean, we have in the UK at least every 2 days there'll be a UK sort of BIM event, and we've got to try and get there, we've got to get the story out, try and socialise it as we're doing today. But the key thing for us as well is down at the bottom. We don't want BIM to become some London-centric initiative within the M25. We're about to create, if you like, 9 regional BIM hubs, if you like, these sentinels that we can start to feed out to, hear what others are doing, you know, start to share our story and hear from others as well. And we're hoping, we're in discussion with CITA, that, you know, let's try and form one of these in Dublin as well, so we can start to, as we do a piece of work, you know, let's get it out, let's share it and hear back your experiences as well. So we want to try and start creating, if you like, our BIM network. Our programme at a high level, well, in January what we started doing was start to engage with each of, if you like, each of the departments. Our first one is the Ministry of Justice, and our first, if you like, BIM project is actually going to hit the road in June, actually out in site of 180 cell blocks. So we're working with that team at the moment, with the main contractor, the design teams, to actually make sure that the models are fit for purpose. February, well, that's how we'll start today actually, we start with the next department. So we start building each day, we build, you know, we open the valve, get another couple of projects into it. And between now and March, we mentioned our 20 work packages, working with our work packages, managed to get the first piece of work ready in terms of our standards to enable these to kick off. Big part of this, you'll see there, I don't know how well you can read it, BS 1192, which, as many of you know, is our data management. We've extended that out for BIM as well, and that's gone to public consultation. But we've got an extensive programme at least this year to keep getting projects very much into the pipeline. And for us, this level 2 is very much, we talk about BIM. I think BIM is often perceived to be design and construct, maybe a 5-year time frame. For us, it's actually asset information model. We're really interested in the 30, 40, 50 years of BIM during that asset life cycle. So for us, it's very much level 2 is about big BIM, if you like. We mentioned the data set for us as well. The data lets us make some fantastic decisions, if you like, about how we can operate an asset. On the right-hand side, you'll see COBE. That's going to be our UK data focus. Now, why COBE? Well, at the end of the day, it's the lowest common denominator. You can feed in the data from Excel. So if you're maybe a tier 4 contractor, you don't have to be going straight into a model. You can start put it in other ways. So reality is maybe about 40–50% of the data will live within the model, but at the end of the day, we know it will all live within COBE. And COBE's free as well, you know, so in terms of cost, which is obviously a big concern for people, there's no cost to COBE, if you like. It is free, and we'll be making the UK format free as well. To the left as well, BS 1192, so we've got the data set, we need the way to manage it as well, so we'll have a British standard around the format as to how we manage it. I know it might look quite complex, but it's actually, when you break it down to chunks, relatively easy in terms of data management. So you give all this data to a client at the end of the day. They go, that's great, well, what do I do with it? How do I start to turn that into operational efficiency? Well, the first thing is, you probably kind of do it anyway. Andrew, where do you do your shopping on a Saturday morning? Where do you buy the shampoo? What shop do you go into? Tesco. Okay, you go into Tesco, you buy your shampoo, you go, you scan it. What happens? It goes through the barcode, it turns that bit of data into some degree of knowledge, ultimately to wisdom. They know how many cans of shampoo to order for the next week. And we're trying to do that with, if you like, the BIM model as well. Start to turn that data into something we can make well-informed decisions from. And we're learning from others, especially in the retail sector. In fact, in the UK, we're starting to see peer client groups coming up. BIM for retail, you know, the top 12 retailers together have created a BIM forum as well, starting to drive their journey in a collaborative manner. So what do we do as a client? Well, we want to come great at articulating our BIM desires. You know, what do we want from BIM? We don't want to just go out to supply chain and say, give us some of that there, BIM. We want to say, this is really what we want from it quite explicitly. I feel like what questions BIM's going to answer for us. And we will be providing industry with clear and simple guidance. But we don't want to become, if you like, the BIM expert. We expect the supply chain to look very much at the complexity as to how to do it. We don't interfere with supply chain or how you do your business, and I'm sure it'll be up to Ireland how that looks as well. But we think, you know, in terms of innovation, it's quite critical that we leave that to the supply chain. But we've got to understand our role in the process. We mentioned the intelligent client, the right procurement route. So we've got to understand that as well. And we mentioned that, you know, that's where we want to become as a client, become the conductor. We want to create the targets, objectives, and create that supply chain innovation that BIM really lets us do. As I said, we're not going to tell industry how you do BIM. You know, industry will figure it out. We've learned lessons from the US. The minute you tell people to do something, that's all they do. They will never try and innovate. We want to kind of set the pace for industry as well. We said we want level 2, we want collaborative BIM by 2016. And what we're seeing already is some of the main contractors are coming saying, well, actually, you've set it at 50, we're going faster already. And we want to encourage that. You know, we've set that as like a minimum standard, but we hope supply chain will go even faster, and we're starting to see that already. We've got lots of different departments in the UK. We want to make sure that if you come to one department, you'll ask for the same thing in terms of BIM. We want to have that consistency right across each of the process. And indeed, other task groups. We mentioned in terms of government construction strategy, BIM's part of it. You know, we're trying to get joined up in terms of things like lean procurement. And we mentioned, well, how do we get the best from our supply chain? Well, we've got to make sure if you work with us for our client, we're a good client. We set the barometer for change, if you like. We will ourselves be collaborative. We will set the rules for playing nice. We'll make sure we've got the right procurement route as well. We know the more collaborative the procurement route, NEC, PFI, the better outcomes you can start to get from BIM. If it's design and dump and the job's 90%, if you like, complete before the contractor gets their hands onto it, the outcomes from BIM, well, they ain't as good. So it certainly needs the right environment. As I mentioned, we're trying to get that soft landing. We want to be able to get all the data, the information, if you like, digitally from design, construct into FM to allow facilities to be able to operate straight away. So that's both the geometry and indeed the data. We mentioned at the start, we were trying to get better in terms of more efficient for delivery, the 20%. And we do that, we take the waste out, we start to collaborate around about the model, start trying to think, how do we integrate with the technology? Having the technology is good and it's a foundation that you do need, but it's very much trying to integrate round about it, starting to drive that efficiency from it. So start thinking about your own process. You know, what do you do at the moment in terms of lean, things like last planner, theory, production control, all key to getting that efficiency out of it. And we think, well, you know, we have a moral imperative with BIM as well. If we're going to do this, what an opportunity. Safe by design is very important for us. And we were at a presentation yesterday, we saw some of the designers starting to use BIM to actually model how you're going to get that big air handling unit out to service it. How can I maintain an asset safely? Start to use BIM to look ahead into the future to actually how you're going to maintain or indeed build that asset. We mentioned for us, you know, this is going to keep growing. It is a launch pad for integration. And what we know is we're not always going to get it right. You know, we're going to bend a few nails along the road, but we think the end game is going to be worth it. And you know, it's obviously part of the journey with you. We mentioned education and training is a massive part of BIM, if you like, and you know, it's going to drive that evolution in the industry. And we reckon in the UK we've got at least 3 million players to try and, if you like, educate of what this looks like. And our challenge, well, I took this picture up in Scotland, probably just turned at Christmas time. And I was telling these guys about BIM, and they looked at me as if I was mad, and they went, no, I've been doing this for 40 years now. Surely, if there's a better way of doing this, you know, it'd be there. We would have found it by now, not you. And I think that's what I say, the big part of BIM is, if you like, not learning, but unlearning. How do you try and change that traditional weave, that there's actually different ways of doing things, if you like, better, more efficient ways. So a big part of what we're trying to do is actually, you know, change the way it is. Behavioural change, it's the big part of this. Education and training are the big thing for us in the UK. How do we make sure we get a consistent supply chain coming out of universities, vocational training for 2016s that are going to deal with our requirements in terms of level 2 BIM? And that's a bit of an exam question for us. We're going out to all universities at the moment with a survey, what are you doing? Not in terms of BIM, but integrated design, project life cycle, facilities management. And what we're starting to see is a model starting to appear in terms of BIM education and training, a mixture of skills and knowledge in BIM. If you're a director of a company, well, you don't really have to know much about the digital toolkit, rather than maybe having a look at a model, being able to navigate it. But you have to have a degree of knowledge around about it in terms of what value is BIM going to be to my business and how can I start to drive change. You move down to operational, well, you may have to have a bit more skill in terms of the tool set. It might be a case you've got to be able to do design reviews with it. And for there, the knowledge is around how do you start to change your business, how do you change policies, what does it look like in terms of contract management from BIM. Down, probably the big layers around about the technical side of things, and that is where there's a degree of training required on the tool set. But let's be honest, probably nothing more than if you had gone to the next generation CAD anyway. And it's probably less about, if you like, the knowledge side. It's more about the tools, the data, and the standards that sit around BIM. And we start to see somebody say, well, what does BIM literacy look like? And the first thing we're saying, well, there's a series of core learning skills around BIM in the top pyramid, and that is very much around the behaviours, change, integration, lean. And then you start to come down these fingers in terms of the skills that will suit your domain if you're an architect, a contractor, or maybe somebody commercial. So we're starting to paint this rich picture of what we've got to do to change education in the UK round about BIM. And then, well, we pulled it all together, and you get this simple thing when we try to map it out called Level 2. I'm sure you can't all read it, and it's like, when people see it at first, but we've tried to make, we'll try and unpack this in a second, but the first thing to say is very much circular. It's very much starting with the end in mind. You know, we want to know how the story ends before we actually start on the journey, if you like. What we learned, the key considerations, as I mentioned, you know, what do you want this for at the end of the day? What's the FM usage strategy going to be? The FM data set that you want from it. So the first thing we're finding, it needs very clear client briefing. As a client, you've got to know what you want from BIM. There's no point going out and saying, I want BIM. It's got to have very clear objectives, i.e. we call it standardising the use cases. What questions do you want BIM to answer for you as a client? So we need very clear client objectives. We've got to then start saying, when do we want to get the data out of it as well? The timing of the data coming out of it is important for us as well. We've got to start defining process, what that looks like, who are the actors, the key players, and when they'll be involved with it. So as I mentioned, we've got to set the right environment as well, right from the outset. And the first thing we discovered in the early jobs as well, just because something looks good in 3D doesn't necessarily mean it's right as well. We've got to start looking at the quality of the data within the models as well. And we've got to make sure that we have a BIM execution plan, a plan for doing BIM that we stick to rigidly right the way through the whole process. So you can see the first part for us in orange is, if you like, is defining BIM. The first thing we'll have in the UK, we call it a PIP, a project implementation plan from BIM, i.e. as a client, what do we want BIM to do for us? You can see these orange balls, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. These are question sets. It might be the first question, is this initial concept design affordable? Tell us using your model data. The next might be a carbon question, an energy question. They'll start to answer questions that validate the client's business case as we go through. You'll see in the sort of magenta colour there, the next thing is an execution plan that will come back from the supply chain to say, okay, I heard what you want, Mr. Client. Now this is how we intend to deal with it. This is our response in terms of the execution plan. The green boxes then, we validate it to make sure we get what we want. But the big thing we're starting to find as a client, we've got to be very good in terms of the level of detail because there's so much waste in construction. The big green blob there is a section through a model that we found, and we actually said, wait a minute, there's too much data in there, there's too much information in it. As a client, we only need, if you like, the red blob, or Kobe data set that's going to allow us to maintain it, and the yellow blob that's going to make us make decisions. So we find there's a lot of waste in models. People are actually doing too much work. What we're finding a bit the Lego principle, even using these big blocks, in the early days, you know, if we start the BIM process early enough with just simple data sets, we can make some right good decisions. So for us, it's very much about the right amount of data at the right time. And you can start to see key to this as well, much as we mentioned the plan of work. You know, you can see these data drops, the green balls. We've got all these plans of work. We're trying to get institutional alignment that these can all happen very much at the same time. You start to see we build the model in blue, the model gets bigger and bigger, and we start to get the model outcomes that we can see that the green, the data drops, you pull the data out of the model, and you start to answer these questions. You know, is it affordable? What does it look like energy-wise? How does my carbon agenda look like? And you can start to see in the sort of orange box ramping up, the data set starts to build. You start to build that information profile, and then you move over to the right-hand side. You give that information to the client who can start to then use it for portfolio management, as maintained model management. And then the data over that 30, 40 years is refined and fed back into the next project. It keeps refining every year, getting better outcomes from BIM. And that's a big challenge for the clients. You can imagine they've got 6 models to manage for the next 30, 40 years, and they've got to keep maintaining that data set to get value in it as well, which is a big challenge. In the UK, our first client, you know, we're trying to get everybody on board this, you know, BIM aeroplane, if I call these government departments. The first early adopter for us was the Ministry of Justice, obviously prison courts in the UK. And this is the first thing we've done with them. We took their entire process map, obviously you can't see it there, I'll maybe just zoom in for you, and tried to look at right through. We didn't talk about BIM, we went in and had a look at their process and said, well, what does that look like? What we worked was right through the project life cycle. And that was itself was a good operation because it started to, start to think about lean with them. And you can start to see the red dots down there were when they made key decisions within their projects. So they got a point where they've got to make a key decision, and they obviously need data to make that decision on. So we then started to say, well, what questions you need to answer at that point. You can see the question sets there, the physical constraints of the site. And you can see how BIM on the right-hand side, you probably can't read it, but there's a BIM question set that can answer that for the client. So for the MOJ, we know when they're now, their key decisions are, and what questions need to answer that for them. So that's how we'll kind of work BIM with them. You don't go in and talk about this thing called BIM. You look at business process, and you look at how BIM can help answer these questions and what data is required for them. Okay, that's all good. So, what have we kind of learned, the lessons that you can maybe take away? I found that BIM for us has been a bit like, I'm no wedding planner, but it's a bit like preparing for a wedding. There's lots of activities you've got to think about in advance of actually getting that project onto site. And if you can take anything away today is go back, start thinking, what does BIM mean to you? You've heard what it is for us, but what does BIM mean to you and your supply chain? Where's it going to bring you value? You start to think about where the value proposition is going to be from you. And we start thinking, well, where is it going to bring your client value? Can you get that to flow back, that reform, that efficiency? How will it flow back to them? Put a commercial overlay in it. How can you maybe reduce risk profile? How's that going to help you to start to win work and be more efficient? We mentioned that, it can answer questions for a client, but BIM can also answer questions for you as well. What questions do you need answered, and how can BIM help you, and when? And the big thing, what behaviours do you have to change as well to make this change programme? And for us, this is very much a change programme. For a practical experience, start to identify at this moment in time, who are you the agents for change in your business? Get them engaged with it and treat BIM not as an adjunct, but change this is very much part of your organisational strategy. Treat it as a change programme, not a nice to have. Start going out, create the community practice, and I think the fact you're all here today is very much paramount to that. Start to join the dots, create these T-shaped people that want to, if you like, join up with others. Raise awareness with your supply chain, because I'm sure there'll be people in your supply chain that need to understand their capability. One of the first things we've done is put surveys out. Where are they in their terms of BIM understanding? You might want to do some BIM apprenticeship thing from what you've heard over these next 10 days. Start getting it out. Start thinking about the technologies as well. The technologies are important, but don't go out and just buy some. Start thinking, what outcomes do you want to get from BIM? You may find it just a viewer. The viewers are mainly free. If it's a design review, the tools are free. What do you want to get from the outcomes from BIM rather than going out and just buying the software? And what tools are going to fit your organisation? Start thinking about training as well. Training, a lot of good stuff online. Start thinking about the data sets as well and how you're going to integrate with that model. We found out very much as well, there's some great plans of work, execution plans. Go on the internet, Penn State have got some great ones. Pull them off, have a look. But for us, it's key that you get the right execution plan and the right level of detail. Otherwise, BIM starts to become a big mess if it's not properly planned. For us, COBE in the UK is going to be our data standard. It's worth a look. Again, it's something that's free. Have a look, try and get some understanding of it. Whether or not it's something Ireland takes up, well, that'll be a question for, indeed, many in the room today, I'm guessing. And one of the first things we've done is start to measure BIM as well. Is it giving you benefit, the number of RFIs, the number of changes, the number of clashes? Start to measure, are you getting benefit out of it? And identify your pilot projects as well. You're probably going to implement it right across all your jobs, but pick that first pile. Start on the journey if you like. You've got to start somewhere and start to build a pipeline and start to think about BIM maturity. You're not going to crack that in day one of your first job. You've got to start building it up, create those series of steps. And for us, why are we doing it and why is everyone in this room today? Okay, we're all, got our own organisations, but I'm sure for many, this really is an opportunity, I think, to nudge this industry to the right-hand side to make it that bit better. In the UK, we say, well, what's the cost of not doing it? Well, it could be for many a case of, I mentioned it's Darwinian, it could be a case of not a case of doing BIM, but if you can't be more efficient, then perhaps it really is a chance of game over. But I like to think of it more positively. We think we've got a real chance in the UK at least to reset the default. We can change that bias in terms of how the construction industry looks. So one message, if you like, is start now. So thank you for listening.